At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
John Lawyer, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Doug. How are you?
Good. Hey, it's great to have you on the show. This is, as I've kind of looked at what you're doing and so forth, this is really fascinating to me. And, I'd love for you to share your journey.
Sure. That's a big question.
I know it is.
But I love the nature of it. Because I feel like the journey is everything. It's the whole purpose of life. And so for me, it really started. I grew up in a small town in central Oklahoma. Pretty typical childhood. I joined the Army straight out of high school. I knew college wasn't for me. That was probably about a year before 9/11. And I enlisted as a counterintelligence special agent, so I went to school for that. And by the time I got out of training, basic training and job training and all that stuff, I got to my first duty station. That would be about 6 months before 9/11. And so really that happened, and then kind of the whole world changed, my whole life changed. And I would probably spend out of the first 15 years of my adult life, I probably spent 12 of those years in combat zones in Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And 6.5 of those years were consecutive in Kandahar, Afghanistan. So that was a pretty intense experience for a long period of time. And it was something. I loved my job. I was good at it. I really worked well with people, and it was something that I especially in the beginning, that I believed in. I think the longer that I was in that military industrial complex machine, the harder it was to believe in all of it, because it's a lot,
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I think that wore on me as time went on. I started to see like the human toll of war, not just on the quote unquote enemy who are just people, but on ourselves, our brothers and sisters in arms, and the toll it took on us, and then the civilians, that are just kind of caught in the middle. And so when after all that, I finally kind of burnt out, and went back home. And, when I went home, I didn't really know who I was. I was lost. I had no identity outside of my job, this thing that I've been doing for all these years. And I had done work where, I thought it was important. And when I walked into a room, people appreciated and wanted to know what I had to say. And I, like I said, I was good at what I did. So outside of that, I'd done it for so long. I'd done it, working 100, 110 hours a week for years at a time. I didn't really know anything besides that. So I didn't really know who I was. I didn't know how to heal. I conceptually knew that I needed to heal, but I didn't know how to start. And that went on for about 7 years after I got home in 2015. And so the next 7 years after that, it was just kind of, I was kind of lost. And then I would say about 2.5 years ago or so, I kind of had this moment of understanding or clarity. Some people call it an awakening. And I kind of understood what my higher purpose was in life and my true calling. And the universe just kind of made sense to me. And I'm kind of on this spiritual path. And I started a nonprofit online digital spiritual community, and that's what I do now. That's what I do every day.
Wow. And I know that you had some relationships there that have helped you to do that. Can you kind of share what that and who they are?
Yeah, it's kind of a unique thing. My wife and I had very similar jobs, and so we've been actually together doing that job. We were co-located most of the time. We were actually usually in the same unit, usually right next to each other. And so, she was there with me the whole time, and we got married in Kuwait. Our wedding certificate's actually in Arabic, and that was different. I think that it's different. It's a different experience because most people don't work with their spouse,
right?
And so we've been together 24/7 for almost 20 years. There were a couple of times that we were apart, but It was intense, and I think it was a great thing because it's almost like we share a brain because we spent so much time together and we did the same job, and so and when you're doing a job, a lot of times you think I got to do this myself because I want it to get done right. But when you have someone that you trust implicitly that can help you and shares your talents and your passions, you can get so much more done, right? It's like two different people can do so much more than like two separate, sets of hands. And so, yeah, it was a very powerful thing.
And then you came together to develop this whole concept of, and I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Is it Kishar?
Yeah, Kishar is what we call it. Yeah.
Okay. And what is that exactly?
We felt like there was room in the 21st century and the digital age for like authentic, meaningful connection online. And we wanted to create a place where people could share their journeys regardless of their spiritual background or philosophical background or religious background. We felt like regardless of what your individual ideas and values are, let's come together and have a conversation about it, have a place where we can talk about that intersection between our spiritual path and our day-to-day lives. Because we felt like that's kind of what life's all about, is figuring out how we live in alignment of our mind, body, and soul. So we wanted to create a place where we can have that conversation. We could have chat conversations. We have an app. We have stuff online. We have, Zoom conversations and roundtables a couple of times a week where we have conversations like this around the table. And we just wanted to create a place where people could either find their path or reinforce their path, and that we could say, hey, here's what's out here, but we're not going to tell you what to believe because that's going to be intensely personal to you, to the individual.
So I'm curious, and this may be too personal, and you don't certainly have to get into it if you don't want, but as you talked about that moment of awakening, do you mind sharing what that was and what you actually experienced? Or too personal?
No, it's not too personal at all. It's a great question. For me, in that moment, it was like a lightning bolt. It was like a sudden thing. I wasn't on this conscious spirit. I think we're all on a journey, whether we know it or not, but I wasn't consciously seeking the spiritual thing. So it came to me, and it was like the universe just made sense. It was like I felt a oneness with everything, like that we're all connected, and it felt very much like regardless of what your individual spiritual philosophy or religious belief or philosophical belief is, that we're kind of all saying the same thing. It might not look the exact same, it might not sound the exact same, but we have so much more in common than we have that separates us. And that's what came to me. And it came to me that I knew instantly that I wanted to help people help themselves, to find their wholeness inside, to find their light if they can't see it. I felt like if I could help someone get through the metaphorical desert or swamp faster than I did, then I'm giving back to the world in a meaningful way, because I was part of this dark machine for so long, and I felt like there was a way to give back.
And as these people come together, and and as you talk about all these, religion, so on and so forth, spirituality, as you talk about spirituality, what does that mean to you? And has there been some basis of, quote, religion that has influenced that? Or, for the folks that are listening, what is your definition of spirituality?
That's a complicated but really important question. I think spirituality for everyone's going to look a little different, but I think usually it boils down to that connection to something deep inside of us, or to the other side, depending on how you look at it. That self with a capital S, or the divine, or the universe. I mean, whatever, it's called a lot of different names. For me, I call it the universe. That's how I see it. I call myself an omnist, which means I respect all religions and philosophical and spiritual constructs. Within that, I feel like I have a lot in common with some of the more universal aspects of Hinduism I appreciate some of the balance of things and the teachings of the Taoism and the way. And there's some indigenous beliefs from around the world that I don't like specifically practice, but I use those to kind of inform my own way of seeing things and moving kind of through the world. So for me, it's kind of an eclectic thing. And I try to do everything I can to read and learn as much as I can so that I can communicate with myself, but so I can also communicate with others about what they believe and how that can inform my own, because I feel like we can ask better questions, answers can change. It doesn't have to be this static thing.
And as we're all on this journey, and I'm very curious because you talk about Kishar and the people join to be able to communicate and share and so on and so forth, regardless of what their religious background is or all of that type of thing. Do you find, number one, that as they come together that they have reached a level of being able to have those type of chats where there's no antagonism going on, but rather there's just acceptance and understanding? Or do you find that sometimes you have that challenge? And what is the level of the people that seek the Kishar? Have they reached a certain level, or are you working with people who are just beginning this journey of self-discovery and self-understanding and spirituality, and they're joining up, and it must be very interesting?
I think for the most part, people that approach it are pretty open-minded. And so they're approaching it with some level of awareness of themselves and that they're moving towards something or they see something. And there are people who are further down the path that they know who and what they are, and they're still exploring it. They're still developing it. So, and I find that those two different types of people have great conversations with each other too, because I think when people approach something with an open mind, they're able to have this enriching conversation and see things that they hadn't thought of. And I find people pretty receptive. I think that when it comes to something like a universalist, open community, I think it attracts people who have that kind of open-minded way of viewing the world and the universe around us.
Wouldn't it be amazing if you could take that community concept and have it actually affect the whole world? What a different world we would have.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing to say. And for me personally, just for me, I feel like that's what we can do as individuals. I've gotten out of politics. I stopped arguing with strangers on the internet for the most part. I feel like what we can do is we can love ourselves and take care of ourselves and lift ourselves up. And that's going to lift up the whole world around us. And if we take that same idea and we approach it one person at a time, we can change the world. I think that that's what this is about, right? Is loving ourselves first, because that's the most important thing. And then moving that forward with others around us in the best way that we know how, the best way that we can.
Well, and you talk a little bit on your website on how to understand the stream of unconsciousness, and that sentence kind of struck me, and I'd love for you to explain what you mean by that, and how does one go about doing that based on your experience?
I think that's part of the process of kind of waking up. There's all this stuff from the time we're kids, right? That our parents tell us, our teachers tell us, our friends, our coworkers, our community. And it's that we have to do this and not do that and walk this way, but don't walk that way. And there's certain milestones we have to reach in our lives. And it, I think, prevents us from looking inward in what we want, what we need, the things that everyone's telling us that we have to do or need to do or shouldn't do aren't necessarily in alignment with what and who we are. So that stream of unconsciousness it pulls us down this like conveyor belt of society where we're not necessarily fully conscious of what we're doing. We're living someone else's story that, you know, we're not living this story that we're writing. We're living this story that someone else is writing for us. Mm-hmm. And it's usually multiple someone's are writing for us. So I think if we stand up, the stream of unconsciousness is not that deep. It's pretty shallow. So we can stand up and we can look around and there's all this vibrant color and all this stuff that we haven't seen before. And then we can ask ourselves, well, what are my values? What are my beliefs? And who am I separate from all this stuff?
Well, and in some sense, you know, you're talking about really discovering your purpose, and then hopefully being able to live that. So you talk about embracing the now. What do you mean by that?
You know, the present moment is this big thing in modern spiritual literature and discussion. And I think, I know for a long time, I held on to a lot of stuff from my past. And that stuff from the past that I was attached to for so long, it's still a part of me, but I'm not as attached to it as I used to be. And there's all this anxiety that I used to have about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. And I've learned to let that go and say, that doesn't matter. Is there something I can do about that right now? No. Okay, well, I'm going to let it go. And I think, so all we're ever going to have is what is the moment. Like you and I sitting here having this conversation right now, I can't worry about stuff that's going on in my life that I need to go do, right? I need to be in this conversation with you and we're going to be better for it. And so it's about embracing the moment because that's all we'll ever have. It's this very fleeting thing too, that if we don't appreciate it, it just floats away. And then suddenly we're, almost fast forwarding through our lives,
Well, and it's interesting. I know that there's definitely a philosophical background behind that, as you say, with Hinduism, definitely with Buddhism, which I'm enjoying learning about. Interesting fellow, Eckhart Tolle. Have you ever read his book on the New Earth? And
I haven't read the New Earth, but I read The Power of Now, though.
Okay, and it's interesting how he talks about the very same thing, that, we can't worry about the future. We really don't need to attach ourselves, as you say, I love the word attached, to the past. We need to live in the now. And I love what you're saying there. And then you talk about discovering our Dharma. Now, I knew that there was some type of Asian background there because Dharma is not a word that we use in the U.S. much. Talk a little bit about what do you mean by discovering our Dharma, and what is Dharma, at least based on your opinion?
I spent a lot of time talking about Dharma. Dharma is our higher purpose, really. That's a rough translation, but it's really our higher purpose. And I think each of us individually has a unique higher purpose or Dharma in this world, in this universe. And it's kind of like what we're meant to do, what we need to do, what we love to do. And, if one, we have to kind of figure out what that is. That's the first step. And then once we know what it is, are we living that purpose every day? Is it aligned with how we live our daily life? Is it aligned with how we do what we do in our job or our vocation? Because if we're living in our Dharma, if we're living in our higher purpose, then we're doing the thing that we love to do. We're doing the thing that we're kind of meant to do. And then life becomes easier because it's not we're not in the rat race. We're in it for ourselves. We're in it for and then we're loving ourselves. So Dharma and self-love, I think, are intricately connected.
So do you find, I'm really curious, do you find that we may ultimately have that inner purpose, which is really as we get to the root spiritual inner purpose of why we're even here in these bodies, and then you also have that external purpose that's still personal, but based on what you've experienced, based on your abilities, your talents, and so forth, of how you can then lift others in the world. Do you find that there may be two types of purposes? And the first one, I don't know if we really think about it so much from a spiritual standpoint, but why are we here? Why have
Yeah.
we been born into the earth and have these physical bodies?
No, I appreciate that perspective that you're looking at it. Like there's this one purpose of us being connected with that inner self or that divine thing or that universal thing or that natural thing. And then there's that other part of us manifesting that in the real world that we walk through every day. So I like that way of looking at it because I think both those things are our purpose. So yeah, I agree with that perspective and viewpoint.
Well, and as you listen to the community talk and communicate and so forth, one of the things I have found is, as you mentioned, there's so much commonality. If we look at the various, quote, religious philosophies, and, it would be wonderful to move the world from religion to truly spirituality. Have you
Right.
found that there's a tremendous similarity and commonality among the various religions? And rather than having all of these fights and everything else that's going on truly based on religion, that we literally could find a commonality that could bring us together?
Absolutely. It's one of my core pillars. Yeah. I after I had my kind of awakening point, I think I read 60 books in 4 months, and I took notes. I took tons of notes. I wrote all kinds of stuff down. I saved tons of quotes from them, and I tried to read from the Abrahamic faith to the Eastern faith, self-help philosophy, and everything in between, indigenous religious beliefs, and in all of that, yeah, everything has this commonality. Everything has this. It's not even like Venn diagram where parts of it overlap. It's really just almost concentric circles on top of each other, just in different language. And and when you talk about the difference between, you brought it up just now, the difference between religion and spirituality, right? When you release all those man-made human touch points from religion, it's just spirituality. There's a lot of beautiful stuff there. And so when you get rid of the dogma, when you get rid of all the red tape, it's all about loving kindness. It's all about knowing yourself. It's all about being in touch with that divine thing. It's all guiding us to the same point, I think.
Well, and yeah, and it's interesting is I'm here in Thailand right now for the winter and heading home real quick for the summer because it's getting really hot here. But what I find is that as and I'm kind of like you from the standpoint of I love to read, I'm so curious, I love to really study, and that has been one of the things I've been fascinated by as I started to talk to people and started to learn as I visited temples and so forth about their beliefs about, and quote, to some degree, the religion, but the philosophy behind the religion. It was fascinating to me to take that and compare that to other, quote, religions. For instance, I looked at Buddhism, I looked at Christianity, and really getting to the root meaning and message of both, I found that there is an extraordinary similarity between the two. And I found that so fascinating. And then as I looked even more, I realized that, so many of us, and I think this is on my mind because of all the things that are happening right now in the U.S. with anti-Semitism and, all the wars and all of that type of thing, and realizing that we have a choice. We have a choice to either say, I'm right and you're wrong, or a choice to be able to look at it and say, you know what, where are the similarities? And if we could develop that type of attitude and concept in our minds, not only does that do it on a world basis, but then going back to even a smaller basis, what an effect could that have on relationships?
Yeah, that's wonderful insight, because I talk to people about this very same thing, that I could go talk to my neighbor or some stranger on the street, and the chances of us agreeing on about 90% of things is pretty high. And so how do we always end up getting so upset about that 10% that we don't agree on? because we all want healthy communities and healthy children and security and safety and all this stuff. We all share in that. We all want very similar things. So how do we get so focused on these things that separate us?
Well, and you talk a lot about challenges in our life, the trek through the desert, the struggles through the swamp of sadness. So let's be honest. We all experience trauma in our lives.
Yeah.
To one degree or another.
Absolutely.
For some, it's horrendous. In your case, I can't even imagine the trauma that you experienced over there in the war and for so many years. And although you were, you had the job that you had, I can imagine the trauma that occurred. So here's the question that I have. As people experience all of this trauma and as they're seeking that journey and understanding their life journey, where does that trauma, where does that challenge, how does that come into play in their life journey, and how do they deal with it?
Yeah, I appreciate talking about trauma, and I agree with you. I think everybody has some level of trauma, and no trauma is better or worse than the other. I think when it comes to what trauma does in our journey, the best answer that I can give people is that the universe or the divine isn't some humanoid thing. It's just the universe. It just is. And there's light and dark in the universe, and there's balance. And the best that I can tell people is that when we come across trauma, when we come across darkness, is that it's perspective, it's universal perspective of that there's something else. There's light out there. There's something different. And I think if you look at a lot of people who have spiritually awakened or philosophically awakened, it's often because they've overcome some obstacle, some dark obstacle usually. And so I think how we end up moving forward with and from our trauma is going to often decide how we're able to live the rest of our lives, and some people won't come out of that place. And we could, there's talks about, living future lives and past lives and reincarnation and all that. And maybe they'll work through it in another lifetime. But in this lifetime, in this real world, it's about being able to slow things down and say, how do I gain perspective right now? How do I let go of my attachment to these things? And I like I told you earlier, I've let go of a lot of attachments to my trauma. That trauma is still a part of me. That person that I was is still the person that I am. And so I don't think that I will ever be separate from it completely. I carry it with me, but I'm not attached to it in this active way. So I think it's about how we process.
And that becomes the question. As you look at your trauma, okay, and you say you for the most part you're not as deeply attached to it. The question is, if you look at that from a positive standpoint rather than as a victim, but as you look at that from a standpoint of what has it done, what did that trauma do to change your life, to help you reach a level of spirituality that you're at now, what would you say that would be?
I'd say that I likely wouldn't have had my spiritual awakening if I hadn't had all that trauma. I wouldn't be here talking to you today. It allowed me to see the universe for what it was. It allowed me to see myself for what I am. It's allowed me to love myself more than I thought that I could. And that, I think when you're able to love yourself completely, suddenly the relationships that you have with other people become more meaningful. They become more robust. So it completely changed my life. The ability to take all of that and find find perspective and the way to look at it in a way that moves me forward in this healthy way. Like now, instead of just standing still and being stuck, I'm moving with the universe. Like I'm moving with the motion of the universe. I'm not just being passed by, you know.
Well, and wouldn't it be interesting if people who, as you mentioned, can be stuck in that past trauma could start changing that perspective and looking at it from the perspective of, okay, this happened, and in many cases it's completely out of their control. And yet, if they look at that from that positive standpoint and, as you say, potentially have that amazing spiritual awakening, what a difference it can make in their lives. And ultimately, and what I have found is some of the, such as yourself, some of the best people that I've talked to that are making such a difference in the world and in people's lives are people who have experienced that deep trauma and have been able to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's that. I agree with that completely. A lot of the people that are able to go out and give their opinion on the way the universe works. Like they have some background there. There's something that got us to the place where we were able to have this conversation, right? There's something that propelled us into, having a conversation on camera and talking to one another, and hoping that we're able to touch someone else. And I always say it's not about helping others. I feel like I want to help people help themselves, because everyone's whole inside. Everyone's got light inside, even if they don't know it. And that's the theme, I think. As dark as it can get, as dark as it does get, there's always light inside of us, and we're always whole deep down in there, even if life seems like it's a mess and there's a train wreck. There's great hope for everyone.
Well, and you talk about multiple lives, and I know that can get very controversial among people of quote religion. Fascinating insight that I'd love to share with you, because you just kind of brought it up. Is I was reading a book by a highly renowned Buddhist monk who really studied the original teachings of Buddha. And he talked about this cycle of life, and which everyone interprets as past lives and multiple lives and so forth, reincarnation. And he talked about the fact that no, it applies to this life. It applies to a rebirth in this life. And then you go into Christianity, how can I be born again? And, it's like, well, you need to be born of the water, which is physical. And it's interesting, he says it's physical, which we are. And then he says, and then it's spiritual, born in the spirit. And as we talk about spirituality, it's fascinating that we literally, if we so choose, can experience a rebirth and a new life here in this existence, if we just choose to do so.
Absolutely. I fully believe that we can. That's that big cycle of life, birth, life, death, and rebirth. We live that within our own life, like, because we get caught in these cycles, and we can break out of them. We can break out of it in this life. We can break free, and it's like, seize the day. It's living for yourself. Like, don't live for anybody else. Don't march to anybody else's drum. Just be yourself. And that's why I think self-love is so important. And because self-love is taking care of yourself first. I mean, it's that cliche of putting the oxygen mask on yourself in the airplane before anybody else, right? But we're not taught. Our communities and our societies don't teach us to take care of ourselves. We're always taught to help others, to always to be outward. We're never taught to be inward.
Well, and what I find, and this is a philosophy that I've developed over a number of years, is, I've always asked the question, do you do in order to become, or do you become, and thus you do? And, as I think about that, and as what you were just saying, how often do we focus on the doing of helping and others and lifting the lives of others and so forth, rather than focusing on ourselves to become the I am, in a religious sense. And then because of that, we therefore do at such a higher level and such a more genuine connection of love and empathy and compassion and all of those type of things.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. And I mean, when you say I am, I think that's it. You ask who am I over and over and over and over again, and eventually you'll just get the answer back to yourself. I mean, I am. And
when you say that, there's a whole spiritual, and I'm not talking religious here, there's a whole spiritual understanding of the divinity within each of us and the power that divinity can give us to then be able to reach out and truly touch the lives of others and lift the lives of others in this world.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when I talk about when you lift yourself up, you lift up the whole world around you, right? That's because, and we know, people, just from a really practical perspective, people who are listening, they know that when they go out in a day and they're in a good mood, they're going to have a good day usually. And the people around them are probably going to have better days. When you walk into, if you're in a conference room and you or someone else walks into that conference room, we've all seen the energy change in that room based on one single person. Can completely change the energy of a room. So like we have all this control over how our reality ends up playing out each moment, each day. Like we really are masters of our own universe all the time.
Well, and to some degree others, as you say, the energy that we put forth can literally affect an entire room full of people.
Yeah. And that's so powerful.
Yeah, it really is. Well, as we get closer to the close here, what I'd love for you to do is to just take a moment and share with the audience what would be the message that you really want to share with the audience today.
I like to tell people that we have more time than we think. We have all this time each day, and make beautiful use of it. And also, there's no need to be perfect in the world. Perfection doesn't exist in this world that we're walking through every day. It probably exists inside of you as this divine, universal thing, but perfection doesn't exist in this reality we share with each other. So just be appreciative of that, and just go out and do the best that you can, and don't try to be perfect. And again, I've said it several times, but really, wholly, completely, and fundamentally, and at a base level, love yourself. And that's not something you just say or do and it happens. It's this process that you keep working at and checking back in with yourself. And it's something that happens over time. But it's this journey and this path that's worth it.
Well, and as we talk about Kishore, who is eligible? Who are the people that would find that just really fascinating and uplifting in their lives to be able to join that community?
I think people who are looking for a community where they can look at the alignment of their mind, body, and soul, and look at other people who are kind of have the same values and beliefs, where it's not an echo chamber, but it's people sharing a kind of a similar open-minded take on exploring what spirituality is for each person, what the universe means to us all, and knowing that they can have their own personal spiritual beliefs, but you can still have that community where you can discuss it. That's what we're about. Like I said, we have discussions every day. We have meditations. We have affirmations. We have just prompts where we have discussions about spiritual topics. And we have weekly videos, Zoom calls where we have conversations like you and I are having right now. And so check out our website and become a member. It's a nonprofit. All revenue goes back into the membership. And we're just trying to give back to the world.
And how do they find the community?
Our main website is kishar.org. It's KISHAR.org. And that's kind of the entrance. And there's our social media is there. We also have a pretty cool YouTube channel that you can find from there that has helpful videos and stuff like that. So check it out.
Great. Hey, John, I have really appreciated you being on the show today. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I love it. I love it when we can have a discussion.
Yes,
so thank you.
So do I. It's the best part, right?
Yeah, it really is, and thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah,
for that,
thank you.
Because it's not always the case, so I really appreciate it. And you know what you're doing, I find, as I said earlier, and you know, it really has hit me in the heart, is that here you are creating a community at a very quote small level, you know, but how that community, literally, and the culture of that community, if it could expand and expand and expand, could literally change the world and create a sense of peace and spirituality in the world that right now we're not experiencing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doug. And I appreciate people like you who are putting this message out into the world that you do on your show. It's a really great thing to see people out there doing their own thing to change the world.
Yeah, it makes a difference. So anyway, thanks so much. And folks, thanks for listening. And if you're so inclined, go to that website. I'm going to go to the website and get involved in that, because I find that that's a great community to help us to really become more of who we really are. So thanks for listening. Have a wonderful week. Look forward to having you join us again soon.